Yo guys, welcome back with another late one. It is a late night tonight. I can't really sleep, I don't know why. So I saw this video. It's apparently scientists finally solved some mystery about Renoki colonies. Let's check it out. Apparently it's in America. I might pronounce it wrong. Check it out, man.
The leaders of this team say what they've found is very exciting and very convincing.
They vanished without a trace. 115 men, women, and children. No bodies, no graves, just a single word carved into a tree, Croatoan.
Leave a
Croatoan. So that's the people. Wait, so what they do? They just...
secret token, as he called it, behind, and this seemed to be the answer. Here was Croatoan carved onto the post.
Wait, what the hell is this? It seems so like... Seems so like long time ago.
For centuries, the disappearance of the Roanoke colony was America's most chilling unsolved mystery.
It is one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries, and it happened in our own backyard.
But now, in 2025, scientists have cracked the code, and what they found isn't just shocking, it's terrifying. The vanishing. In the summer of 1587, under the searing Atlantic sun, 3 English ships slipped through the shallows and anchored off Roanoke Island, an untamed spit of land nestled along the jagged coast of what is now North Carolina. Aboard
Oh, so they got lost. They got lost in Carolina.
those ships were 115 men, women, and children who stepped onto the New World soil, not as adventurers, but as dreamers, each carrying the fragile hope of a new beginning. They were not the first to try. 2 earlier English
Wait, so this is like before America?
attempts had already failed, marred by violence, poor supplies, and infighting. But this group,
Hey, it's
led by
good
the
movie.
affable yet pragmatic John White, was different. They had brought their families, they had planned for permanence, and among them was a newborn symbol of that hope, Virginia Dare, John White's granddaughter, and the first English child born on American soil. Her birth was celebrated not only as a familial joy, but as a political statement that England could root itself here. The settlers worked tirelessly under a canopy of pine and oak, erecting a modest wooden fort, planting crops, and forging fragile ties with local tribes. The land was wild, beautiful, and unforgiving, but they endured. Then, almost as soon as they had arrived, White was forced to return to England for more supplies, a voyage he expected would take only a few months. But Europe was on fire. England was locked in a deadly standoff with Spain, and Queen Elizabeth I had conscripted every available ship for the fight against the Spanish Armada. White was stranded for 3 long years, helplessly
Dude, I remember the Spaniard, the England, the French. They all hated each other.
watching the calendar move while imagining what might be happening back across the ocean. When he finally returned to Roanoke in August of 1590, the silence was suffocating. The harbor was eerily calm. The fort stood exactly as he had left it, palisades upright, gates unbroken, structures intact. But life was gone. Not a single soul stirred. No laughter, no footsteps, no smoke rising from hearths. The air was heavy, as though the island itself knew what had happened and refused to speak. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no scattered belongings, no graves freshly dug or bones picked clean by time. The only trace of the settlers' fate was carved into wood, the word Croatoan on the fort's entrance post, and the unfinished letters CRO on a nearby tree. White's heart pounded. That word, Croatoan, was the name of a nearby island, home to a friendly indigenous tribe. The agreed
Wait, so then... Did the indigenous people take them? Or like, what happened?
upon code, in case of emergency relocation, was to carve their destination. There was no cross, no distress symbol. Perhaps, he thought, they had moved voluntarily. Perhaps they were safe. But fate denied him the chance to know. A violent storm descended as White prepared to set sail for Croatoan. His ship's anchor broke, supplies dwindled, crew morale collapsed. With a heavy heart, White turned back for England, never to return again. To this day, his journal remains one of the only first-hand accounts of that moment. His words tremble with confusion and restrained despair. It was not what he saw that terrified him. It was what he didn't do. And for that, an entire colony, a piece
that
of
life
England
used to be
transplanted to
pretty
the New
chill, man.
World, vanished without a single trace.
I
Buried
low-key
clues and
wouldn't mind.
dead ends. In the centuries that followed, Roanoke's fate became a puzzle no historian could solve, and no conspiracy theorist could resist. As early as the 1600s, reports emerged from New English settlers further north, in Jamestown. They spoke of strange encounters, tribes with members who spoke broken English, who claimed to descend from white ancestors. Some bore gray eyes, lighter hair, and features uncommon among local nations. There were rumors, too, of crude maps showing villages inland with English-style structures, buildings laid out in straight lines as if guided by a Western hand, but nothing was ever verified. Every lead ended in ash. In time, more sinister theories arose. Some believed the colonists had been killed by nearby tribes after a breakdown in diplomacy. Others blamed internal conflict.
Yo, I truly believe that if we didn't bring illness to the Native American and wipe them out with like smallpox or other kind of disease, I'm not so sure if we can beat them. They're pretty fast, man.
Conflict, starvation,
And they
or
know
harsh
the land.
winters driving them to cannibalism or madness. A few theorists pointed fingers
But
at
I
the
do know
Spanish,
that we have
who were known
superior
to patrol
weapons
the
and
Atlantic
guns, so
seaboard, eliminating
someone
rival
just went
settlements
down.
in secret. Then came the stories of curses, of sacred burial grounds disturbed, of the land itself rejecting the foreign settlers like a body fighting infection. Despite the lack of answers, excavations and studies persisted. Archaeologists scoured the island and its surrounding regions. They unearthed shards of pottery, rusted weapons, and beads, items that may have belonged to the colonists, or may not. The line between myth and reality was paper thin.
As the Dare Stone, so called because the message on the rock is from Eleanor White Dare.
In 1937, the infamous Dare Stones surfaced, rocks inscribed with supposed messages from Eleanor Dare, Virginia's mother. The first stone told of disease, death, and Eleanor's grief. The story captivated the nation. More stones followed, too many. Eventually, scholars labeled most, if not all, as fakes. Hope gave way once again to disillusionment.
So all that work could turn out to be fake. Ain't no fucking way.
Yet something about the Roanoke colony's disappearance refused to die. It haunted the American imagination. It was a blank canvas of just enough truth to inspire speculation and just enough absence to sustain legend. Centuries passed. Technologies advanced. DNA studies were proposed. LiDAR scans and ground-penetrating radar combed the Carolinian coast. But the
So what
mystery
happened? What'd you
remained
find
unsolved. An entire community vanished into the woods and waves, and in their place, only questions. The map that held a secret. It began, as many great historical discoveries do, with something small. In 2012, a curious researcher at the British Museum was carefully analyzing a 16th century watercolor map titled La Virginia Pars, crafted by the English artist and
Dude, you know what's crazy, dude? People back then don't have GPS. They can't call nobody if something fucked up in the sea. Just think about that, bro. Like, there's no lights at night. You can't shine the headlights. There's no heating. There's no toilet. Bro. They just sold
and explorer John White.
I wasn't able
The
to
map,
sign up.
delicate and sun-faded, had long been an object of scholarly interest. But that day, something peculiar caught the researcher's eye. An anomaly beneath a patch of paper, barely visible unless you knew precisely where to look. Using backlighting, an old technique for detecting underdrawings and erasures, they saw it, the faint but unmistakable outline of a square-shaped fort, carefully etched beneath the surface. Hidden beneath a patch near the confluence of the Roanoke and Chowan rivers, the symbol was drawn in invisible ink, or possibly an iron gall composition that had faded over centuries. What made this discovery so extraordinary wasn't just the clandestine nature of the marking, it was its location, exactly 50 miles west of Roanoke Island. That distance was not random. It
Ain't no fucking way. It's fucking Oak Island again. The fucking Oak Islands documentary. That shit going on for how long now? It's like 16 fucking season. They haven't find it yet. And every season they say they're gonna find it.
It corresponded with a
fucking
cryptic
scam.
note in John White's own journals, written before he returned to England in 1587. In it, White recorded that the Roanoke colonists, who would later vanish without a trace, had intended to move 50 miles into the Main. That phrase, long dismissed or overshadowed by the mystery of the word Croatoan, carved into a tree, suddenly gained new weight. Why had White hidden this fort? Theories swirled among historians. Some believed he intended to protect the colony's location from Spanish spies, who were actively scouring the Americas to undermine English settlements. Others wondered if White himself never returned because he feared what he might find: failure, disease, or something worse. The map, a seemingly benign artifact, had become a cipher for the mystery of America's first lost colony. The discovery electrified the archaeological world. Soon after, the North Carolina-based First Colony Foundation, a group dedicated to solving the mystery of Roanoke, decided to act. Under the direction of renowned archaeologist Nick Lucchetti, they began an investigation into this new location, an area along the Albemarle Sound in Bertie County, North Carolina. This promising site was soon given an ominous and hopeful new name: Site X.
What happened there?
Site X and the Ghosts of Bertie. The dig at Site X began with great anticipation, but not without skepticism. The terrain, thick with pine forest and tangled underbrush, bore little resemblance to the traditional image of an English fort. And as the excavation expanded, the team found no palisade walls, no trenches, no barracks, nothing that screamed fort. But then, something. Just beyond the boundaries of an abandoned Native American village known as Metachem, the soil began to yield secrets. Unearthed beneath centuries of sediment were fragments of English pottery, distinctly dated to the late 1500s.
They'd never find
These weren't
anything
ceremonial or trade
Fucking
items.
pottery
They were
again.
utilitarian. Bowls, storage jars, and cooking pots. Many glazed in the characteristic greenish tint of Surrey, Hampshire wares from Elizabethan England. And one detail
Let's be
stood
serious,
out
dude.
more than
Where's
any
the
other.
gold?
There were no clay
You
pipes.
want to see the gold.
This absence spoke volumes. The settlers of Jamestown, founded in 1607, were famously fond of clay tobacco pipes, which often littered their refuse pits. The Roanoke
Smell
colonists,
terrible.
however, predated that trend. Their lack here
hate
wasn't
those
an
things.
oversight, it was a timestamp. This discovery marked something radical. The pottery didn't just suggest English presence, it hinted at habitation. These weren't casual visitors or lost stragglers. Someone had lived here, cooked here, stored food, and settled, at least for a while. As interest in the region grew, the team deployed ground-penetrating radar to survey the surrounding area. That's when a second promising location came to light, just 2 miles away, a place they would later call Site Y. Again, the soil offered up quiet but powerful testimony. This time, the artifacts were broader in scope. Fragments of European ceramics from different regions, suggesting
Bro, let me take a wild guess. They die out because of disease. That's my guess.
a mixing of cultural origins. This
Natural
introduced a new
disaster.
possibility, one that had rarely been considered in such detail before. A scenario began to take shape in the minds of researchers. It was not a tale of a single lost colony, but of dispersal. A desperate and intelligent attempt to integrate, adapt, and endure in the harsh and unfamiliar terrain. Some may have embedded themselves in local tribes like the Croatan. Others may have ventured further inland to build makeshift settlements under the cover of secrecy, possibly under the protection of allies or sympathetic native leaders. Site X and Site Y, separated by a sliver of forest and 4 centuries of time, began whispering of a story lost to colonial records.
Whoa, that's
A story not
cool
of
as hell.
failure, but of fragmentation. Not of disappearance, but of transformation. And the deeper they dug, the more it seemed that Roanoke's disappearance wasn't a single moment in history, but a mosaic of choices, survival, and quiet endurance. The Hatteras Dig, another side of the story.
Bro, I'm
As Site
telling you,
X continued to dominate the headlines with
Natural
its
disaster.
tantalizing clues and scholarly debates, a
There's too
quieter
many
but equally
motherfuckers come
compelling
by over the sea
excavation
to visit,
was unfolding
and
over
they-
200
none
miles
of
to
them
the
have
southeast
any kind of
on the
shots.
windswept, salt-sprayed sands of Hatteras Island.
That's like me going back
Once
to
known as
Vietnam right now
Croatoan,
and drinking the
this
water.
island had always whispered
Hell
legends of
no.
a different fate for the lost
I'm gonna get
colonists.
sick.
And now, those whispers were being unearthed in the most literal way possible. At the center of this excavation was British archaeologist Mark Horton, working in tandem with the Croatoan Archaeological Society, a local team led by island native Scott Dawson.
Oh, so the people are
Unlike
actually still
Site
alive.
X, where artifacts hinted at relocation,
not like-
the Hatteras
they're not
findings
extinct.
told a story of assimilation. Among the windswept dunes and beneath layers of shifting coastal soil, they unearthed unmistakable signs of English presence: a rusted rapier hilt, corroded gun parts, and most remarkably, a slate writing tablet still bearing the faint scratch.
Gun pallets, guns part, bullets part, sword part. So that means there's fighting between two kind of different culture. I'm telling you, man.
Patches of English script. These weren't random relics. They were deliberate, human, purposeful, left behind by people who were clearly living on the island, not just passing through.
Oh, maybe they.
Even
just
more
using it to
compelling was
protect
the
the land.
island's oral tradition, passed down for generations among the Lumbee and other native communities. These stories, long dismissed by mainstream academia as myth or romanticism, claimed that white settlers had joined with the native Croatan people, forming families, building lives, and adapting to their new home. Until now, those stories had remained just that, stories. But the artifacts told a tale that echoed those voices from the past, lending credibility to what had long been marginalized as folklore. Scott Dawson's 2020 book, The Lost Colony and Hatteras Island, documented these findings in detail. His argument was provocative. The colony didn't vanish. It fractured. Some may have gone inland, towards Site X, but others, perhaps more than previously imagined, integrated with the indigenous communities on Croatoan itself. They weren't lost. They were simply hiding in plain sight,
Oh, so this is going to the bigger
camouflaged by
city.
history's neglect.
Like,
This raised an
City
even more
emerges.
daring possibility. What if both stories,
understandable.
Site X and Hatteras, were true? What if the lost colony didn't collapse, but evolved? The science of the lost. To truly explore this theory, scientists knew they had to go beyond shovels and maps. This wasn't just archaeology anymore. It was forensic investigation across centuries. And so began the next phase.
dude, I really like how
High-tech
they,
detective work.
make those little
Using
boxes.
ground-penetrating
How
radar,
do they do that?
teams were able to detect subterranean anomalies without disturbing the fragile
It must be
landscape.
hard work.
Then came LiDAR, a technology that strips away vegetation in digital scans to reveal ancient structures and landscape changes long hidden by time. These tools revealed patterns, post holes, fence lines, old hearths that suggested long-term settlement activity in areas previously
Bro, it's probably hot as hell. Fucking mid-afternoon, August. Your ass out there, no shade, holding a fucking brush, brushing a fucking rock. Yo, you can count me out on it.
previously thought empty. But the most chilling insights came from the artifacts themselves.
Look like
Researchers
hard work.
compared pottery shards, tools, and remnants from sites X, Y, and Hatteras, hoping to draw connections or spot inconsistencies. What they found flipped the timeline upside down. Unlike artifacts from Jamestown or Plymouth, where clay tobacco pipes, post-1600 ceramics, and distinct European wares are common, none of those markers appeared at the Roanoke-associated sites. Instead, the materials were consistent with a pre-1600
they
English
look
presence,
cool. Is that gold?
precisely when the Roanoke settlers would have disappeared. This meant one thing. These weren't just traces of later colonial movement. These were the Roanoke colonists themselves. Then came the bombshell, DNA analysis. Buried in the genetic code of local indigenous communities, scientists began to find markers consistent with Western European ancestry, dating back centuries. Not the result of later European mingling, but something far older. Something that aligned suspiciously well with the timeline of 1587.
What,
And that's when
Viking?
the researchers said it, quietly at first. Then with a rising tremor of realization, this was terrifying. If the implications were true, everything we thought we knew about early American history, Jamestown in 1607, Plymouth in 1620, the Mayflower mythology, might not be the beginning at all. The true first chapter may have been written by a group of colonists who had already been declared dead, but they hadn't perished. They lived, they adapted, and then they vanished from memory.
Oh, shit.
Skeptics versus believers. For every breakthrough unearthed in the red North
So
Carolina
they was
soil, a
pre-Columbus.
fresh debate seemed to rise from it like smoke. The mystery of the lost colony wasn't just a historical enigma, it had become an ideological battlefield. On one side were the believers, convinced the evidence told a coherent story. On the other were skeptics, scholars and scientists who saw the findings not as revelations, but as riddles. Dr. Charles Ewan, a veteran archaeologist, was among the most vocal critics. He accused the researchers of confirmation bias, warning that the pursuit had become less about objective discovery and more about vindicating long-held theories. "They're trying to prove a theory," he famously said in a 2019 interview, "not disprove it. That's dangerous for science." Then there was Scott Dawson, a Croatoan native and historian whose family had lived on Hatteras Island for generations. To him, the answer had always been obvious. The colonists had integrated with the Croatoan tribe. There were oral histories, linguistic overlaps, and even genetic hints to confirm this theory. They went to Croatoan, he insisted,
This is what happened when Columbus.
not deep inland into hostile territory. Site X, Dawson argued, was not only too far, over 50 miles from Roanoke Island, but it was also surrounded by groups the colonists had previously antagonized.
thick
It would have
boys.
been suicide. Yet, within the First Colony Foundation itself, the very organization spearheading the search, consensus was elusive. One camp pushed the split colony theory, that the settlers divided, with some seeking refuge with friendly tribes along the coast and others venturing inland. Another camp dismissed the inland theory altogether, arguing that any European artifacts found there might have belonged to earlier exploratory missions, perhaps even a scouting party sent before the main 1587 group. The artifacts, however, told a murkier story. A silver ring with a lion crest, a rapier hilt, unmistakably European, fragments of pottery chemically linked to 16th century English kilns, enough to tantalize, not enough to confirm. Still,
I guess it would make sense that these people were there first, and then Columbus kind of heard a rumor about it, and then he's like, "I bet, man. Fuck, I don't really know if it's true or not, but hey, heard a rumor about we can be rich. We can be the first one. Once we're the first one, we can make it publicly. Yeah."
Still, as the years wore on, skepticism began to bend. New technologies like ground-penetrating radar, drone-assisted mapping,
I would
and
not be
DNA
surprised if you
sequencing
were
added
the
fresh tools to the archaeologist's toolkit. Radiocarbon dating got more precise. Soil analysis became more granular, and year by year, artifact by artifact, the evidence kept accumulating, quietly, stubbornly, like whispers from the past refusing to be ignored. And then, in 2025, the whispers turned into a roar. The 2025 breakthrough. The dig site was unassuming, a patch of dry
the good
earth
part
near the
now.
banks of the Chowan River, just miles from the elusive Site X. It was a cold February morning, and the First Colony Foundation team had little reason to expect anything groundbreaking.
Yeah, me too.
Until they found her. The burial was unmistakably Christian. The skeleton lay supine, head facing west, feet pointing east. The traditional orientation meant to face the rising sun on Resurrection Day. There were
We got God in this. All right, I'm listening.
no grave goods, no elaborate markings, just the bones, weathered by time but intact. A quiet dignity lingered in the way she had been laid to rest. But what changed everything was the DNA. Mitochondrial analysis revealed she was of European descent, and she was female. The implications hit the team like a thunderclap. The all-male 1585 Roanoke expedition ruled out. The Jamestown settlers, they came years later and had no record of traveling this far inland. This woman didn't arrive with explorers. She had lived and died there, which meant others must have too. For centuries, the phrase "the lost colony" had conjured images of mass disappearance, of settlers swallowed whole by the wilderness. But now, with the discovery of this single grave, the narrative was being rewritten in real time. "This is terrifying," one archaeologist
Did
was
they
heard
just, like,
whispering
die
through
out?
tears. "Not just because we found her, but because now we know others were there too." The settlers hadn't vanished. They hadn't been killed off in a single blow. They had moved. They had adapted. They had survived. By now, the breadcrumbs have taken us to two possible destinations and two very different fates. The mounting archaeological and linguistic evidence points to a split migration. It appears the colonists, once united under the impossible dream of building a new England in a harsh, unfamiliar world, fractured under pressure. Some, perhaps the most desperate or pragmatic among them,
dip.
made their way southeast to Hatteras Island. There, among the Croatan tribe, they may have found an uneasy sanctuary. Traces of English-style tools, fragments of European pottery, and even genetic hints in the descendants of native families have all converged on this theory. The Croatan, known for their relative openness, may have allowed the weary settlers to integrate, though not without profound cultural loss on both sides. This was not assimilation out of ambition. It was a quiet surrender to necessity. Others, it seems, ventured inland, toward the dense woodlands around Metaquem, farther into the wilderness. Perhaps they sought autonomy, a fresh start, or simply a place to vanish. Inland, they could disappear from the grasp of potential rescuers, but also from the maps of history. Their decision, in all likelihood, was not guided by strategy or ambition.
So by
It
what?
was sheer survival. The colony had been ravaged by too many silent enemies, drought that turned their crops to dust, disease that had no cure, and starvation that tested every moral boundary.
Hey, disease, man.
Add to that the omnipresent fear of attack
Whoa.
from native tribes or even Spanish forces.
Listen, even if we remotely just got 3 of those, dude, back then,
And perhaps the most fatal threat of
It'd
all,
be over.
internal fractures,
you don't need more
disagreements,
than 3 with the kind of
divisions.
weapon they equip.
Fear erodes unity faster than any enemy at the gates. When trust dissolved, so did the colony. So, they did what desperate people always do when faced with the end. They ran, not as one, but in scattered threads, some to the sea, some to the trees, and all disappeared. The mystery that made America. The Lost Colony is more than a mystery. It's a parable written in vanishing ink. For centuries, we treated it like a historical hiccup, an unresolved curiosity buried in textbooks. But the story of Roanoke is something far more intimate. It's the American origin story most people have never truly heard. Not because it lacked significance, but because the voices were quiet, silenced by time,
sense.
by nature, by indifference. And yet, within this silence lies a story of breathtaking depth, of fear, yes, but also of resilience, of courage, of people who risked everything to carve a future from untamed soil, and who, in their final days, made impossible decisions with unimaginable
Got
consequences.
a long nose hair.
This is a story about survival and the price of
Gotta
it,
plug it.
about how cultures collided, then blurred. How fragile memory is in a world where no statues are raised, where no graves are marked, when the only monument is a word.
Hey, so that's it, dude. I guess I was right. I guess so. So I guess they did die out because of disease and all that. So, yo, that was a video. It is interesting. At first, I thought it was just some like mystery murder, but the more we get into it, it is interesting. So, actually, Columbus was not the first one. There was another group of colony was way before Columbus. Kind of makes sense. So, if I'm assuming if some of them break away and Columbus did hear the news or got some of the letter or heard the rumor, it would make sense that he would able to guess or have some of the note to travel to America and actually publicize the colonies. So, hey, yo, thank you for watching. Until next time. And